the Fremont Podcast now has a newsletter. In the newsletter, we catch up with guests that we've interviewed in the past. We go into more depth on subjects we've covered. We talk about local Fremont events that are ongoing, and we've even included some local reporting that you can't find anywhere else, not even on the podcast. The Fremont Podcast Community Table newsletter is absolutely free. If you'd like to sign up, you can do so at thefremontpodcast.com.
You had less advantaged people making lace, earning a living, and it was something that very wealthy people consumed. And it was a status symbol. It was, think of, Louis XIV and the way he dressed. It was a major status symbol. It was his Ferrari. It's like an octopus. It's got tentacles everywhere, in history and money, in politics. It's just,
Coming to you straight from Fremont, California, this is the Fremont Podcast, dedicated to telling the stories of the past and present of the people and places of the city of Fremont, one conversation at a time.
Hello, Fremont. This is Jarrell. You are listening to episode 71 of the Fremont Podcast.
Now, here's your host, Ricky B.
I don't know how it's going to sound on here. I'm a little hoarse because I'm getting over something, or I got over something last week, but the residual effects have changed my voice. So I'm a little hoarse. You might hear it on the recording. So, Kim Davis, is that correct?
Yes.
I'm at the Lace Museum in Fremont. Kim Davis, what is your role?
I'm the managing director, and what that really means is just sort of a jack of all trades. We're a very small operation with a lot of personal service. We're a small nonprofit, and our main goals are to preserve lace and then the arts of lace making. Okay.
So when I first saw this, and just to be clear, I'm grateful to have a wonderful team to work with making this podcast, good editors and research assistants and schedulers and all that. But they put the Lace Museum on my schedule, and I was trying to figure out what type of lace are we talking about? Like shoelaces or what kind of lace are we talking about? So this is lace, like embroidery, like clothing lace. How would you describe lace?
We, in a large sense, we describe lace as thread around holes.
Okay.
It's really all about the contrast of the negative, the negative space. Okay. With no thread.
Okay. Thread around holes. That's kind of cool. So where we are right now in Fremont is kind of tucked away. It took me, I think I had to take 2 or 3 U-turns before I realized that my map was actually correct, and it was taking me where I am now currently. But you, at this point, you're not open, or are you open?
We will be opening on Saturday.
Okay, which is, if you're listening to this, is May 13th, May 14th. Is that what it is? Okay.
Mother's Day weekend.
And you're going to be opening up. Where did you move from when you moved to this location? And then why did you move from where you were?
Okay, so we've been in Sunnyvale for close to 30 years. We were there a very long time in a little strip mall. Okay. And, what's happening in Sunnyvale, you see a lot of things getting more run down because they're getting leveled and new buildings are going up. And it was just time to make a change. We also were interested in a smaller space. That space was retail, and which is more expensive than office space. And we were really looking to spend more time with our collection and focusing on that end of things. Because with the internet and all, we don't do as much retail as we used to. So it was changing with the times. Okay. Changing with the times.
Did the Lace Museum start in Sunnyvale, or did it have a previous location?
It was actually at the old mill.
Okay.
Have you heard of that before?
No. Tell me about it, please.
Oh, the old mill was awesome. And I honestly don't know which town it was in. It was over in that whole Santa Clara, somewhere between Santa Clara, Palo Alto. I think it was Mountain View, actually. And the old mill was, in fact, an old mill. It had a mill in it and the water wheel and the whole thing. It was really neat. Wow. But it got leveled and they built something else on top of it. When I was in my teens. I know, it's sad. But
you're not bitter at all, are you?
I try not to be, but I did really like that place. Yeah. But we were there for a while and then went into storage for a few years. Our founders, one of them had us in their home, basically. And after that, we found the place on Murphy in Sunnyvale.
Okay.
And we're there for a really long time.
Wow. So what is the Lace Museum? Like, I mean, so I'm here. It kind of blew my mind when I walked in the door, and I'm looking all around. I've got lace on display, got showcases here, mannequins that have incredible lace on them. And I don't know that personally I've ever paid that much attention to lace, although I do have close friends that work in the bridal gown industry, and when I've been around them, they've talked about the lace on particular garments. So I have very little knowledge when it comes to lace. So what is the Lace Museum, and what is it that you do here?
So our goal here is to preserve the lace itself. So we have a collection of over 10,000 items, either pieces of lace or tools to make lace. And we have a large library and archive. Some of our books are on the history of lace, and some of them actually, about half of them, have instructions on how to make laces, patterns, and that kind of thing. We mainly work on conserving those items and then educating the public about their existence, and then also educating the public in the art of making any of these kinds of lace. That really is part of our mission, to preserve not just the lace itself, but the techniques to make it.
Okay. Can you tell me in a nutshell what are the origins of lace, and where did they come from?
Goodness.
And and specifically, what has influenced perhaps you or this museum to preserve that?
Okay, yeah, that would be a tough one in a nutshell.
Big nutshell, maybe coconut shell.
It's a coconut
Yeah,
shell, yes. Let me take a stab at that. So there are many different types of lace. People look at lace in different ways. I'll give you my personal view. I like to look at them at how they're constructed.
Okay.
So, you have laces that many people would recognize, like crocheted or knitted lace. Those are families of lace. Tatting was very popular in this country. But if you go back past that, coming out of pretty much everywhere in Europe, you had both bobbin and needle lace.
Okay.
And they're constructed in a different way. And I can't describe that in a nutshell, but you have all these different types of lace.
That's why people need to come to the museum, so you can describe it to them when they get here.
We can help you with that in about a 15, 20-minute tour.
There you go. Okay.
Definitely. And I would say that needle lace is something you're making with a single thread, one stitch at a time. It is the most time-consuming, and it was born out of embroidery. Bobbin lace is a combination of weaving and braiding.
Okay.
So, yes, you have these two major types of lace that were driving things, and they actually drove European economies back in the day.
Wow.
So
How so? Talk to me about that a little bit.
I would say that both bobbin and needle lace emerged together in the late 1400s.
Okay.
So, we're thinking the Tudors, Queen Elizabeth I, that kind of stuff. At first, the bobbin lace was made in metal. So you had threads that were silk in the center with metal around the outside.
Wow, that's pretty intricate.
It's one of my personal passions. All of us have our own unique thing that we're good at or research, and that's something I've done a lot of studying and publishing on that I personally like.
Wow. That's incredible.
And so they had sumptuary laws where people below a certain rank couldn't even wear the stuff. It was very costly. Needle lace is generally not made in metal, but both of them kind of grew up together and evolved and changed, and they both changed with fashion. And they kept evolving with the fashion all the way through into the early 20th century. So it had a really good long run.
Right.
And I think part of the way that it drove economies, and this is an overview, I mean,
sure. Yeah.
People spend lifetimes on any of these.
If we're talking going back to the 1400s, obviously there's a lot of history to be to be told during that last 500 years, 600 years.
But you had people, you had less advantaged people making lace, earning a living, and it was something that very wealthy people consumed, and it was a status symbol. It was, think of Louis XIV and the way he dressed. It was a major status symbol. It was his Ferrari.
Yeah, that's incredible. Wow. So the Lace Museum is trying to preserve that kind of like the telling of that history, but also the the products that came out of different time periods. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We look at the history, we look at the making, and then we look at the actual objects.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then apart from that, you also teach, like, I'm not just teach about it, but you're actually helping people understand how to make it themselves. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we've been teaching since we opened, and we teach everything that we have teachers for. This is one of those things where you generally need a human to do it, and we go with our local talent. During the pandemic, I started virtual classes, which was kind of crazy, but it worked out really well. And it helped us from going under, because that was a really hard time for everyone. And it's absolutely thriving now. We're teaching people all over the world online.
From here?
Sometimes from here, but I actually have moderators and people doing it all over.
Wow.
I have an exceptional person who's now running it. Kind of like you, I started it.
Yeah.
And during the pandemic, I was working upwards of 120 hours a week. It was insane. And she came on, and she's mostly running it by herself now. And it's fantastic. It's freed me up to do my other work, yes.
Wow.
You can hear more of this conversation in just a moment. Hello, Fremont. This is Andrew. Is there a sense of community in Fremont? I know we talk about community a lot here on the podcast, but we've never actually gone out and asked. So we sent one of our reporters out to Central Park, Lake Elizabeth. His name is Mark. Mark was able to speak to a few people, and then we made this.
Actually, I was born, though, in the South, but I raised my children here, 2 daughters, my husband and I, and this has been a great, actually, location for raising kids. The educational system within the Fremont Unified School District, excellent. The girls, they did very well from elementary all the way through high school, and they graduated with honors.
Congrats. Good to hear.
We couldn't have asked for better neighbors. It was like a village, which is so very important when you're raising children. And everyone just looked out for each other. It was a neighborhood where you had a lot of young families when we moved in. And everyone just pretty much just, the kids went to school together, and we bonded with the parents. And we would have the annual night outs. Those were really great, where when the new people came into the community, everyone else had a chance to meet them and greet them and get to know them. So I think it's very important that you do get to know your neighbors, as what we did. As far as any improvements, maybe opportunities during the summer for more opportunities for the youth. I would say that, and affordable summer opportunities, because sometimes parents can't afford to pay a lot of money for a summer camp for kids. So waivers maybe should be given to those families that cannot afford the summer camps.
It's like we see neighbors, kids playing around the road, our house. Yeah, it's very connected.
Mm-hmm. Is there any other reasons why it feels like you feel that particular connection?
Not much. Everyone is friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then again, just how do you feel it is? How do you feel it's connected? Or
through the park, there are not much areas where we can connect with people, but there are a few temples and parks are there.
Right.
Yeah, we feel good.
If you're like single family homeowner and you have a family here, or you're in tech, but me as a single millennial, no, I don't feel community at all.
For sure.
Not at all. Well, I have gone to the food truck festival, which I appreciate, and I've talked to some of the vendors. They're nice, they're okay, but as far as like community goes and like feeling the vibe, if I had a kid, yeah, this place would be perfect for me. But as a single queer millennial, no, this place does nothing for me. But I do like that it's safe. I like that just everyone minds their own business and kind of just leaves you alone, You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, it's not like a big city vibe.
Yeah.
It's like a suburb vibe.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you're granted a level of safety here that you're not in other places. And I don't want to say like safety is an illusion, but I do. Honestly, the vibes are just more comfortable here in terms of safety.
Sure.
But also nothing to do, boring, quiet, which is why I moved when I was younger.
I mean, I have several relatives or friends in the community, so yeah, it's pretty good.
And is there, sort of like outside of that, just like interactions with other people in town and things like that? Feels like there's a good connection there?
Yeah, it is good connection. Like, like whenever we come for walks, we do like greet people and all, and people usually respond well. Yeah, it's nice.
Where, if anywhere, does it feel disconnected to you?
At least I haven't really encountered scenarios where it's disconnected in our limited interactions. Maybe we interact more with friends and also I don't know much.
Yeah, for sure. Do you mind me asking how long you've been in town or in the area for?
We have been in Fremont for, I think these are 6th or 7th year actually.
If you don't mind me asking, how long have you guys been there? Do you guys live in Fremont or?
So we had very recently moved to Union City like 2 months ago, but
gotcha.
I had been living in Fremont since 2017.
Okay, for sure.
And we just moved 2 months ago, and Sarah has been living in Fremont
since 2020. But I was actually pleasantly surprised at how much I loved the area. I did not expect to be like a suburbs girl, but I totally am.
Do you feel Fremont is a connected community?
Good question. I feel like there's pockets, but as like a big community, I'd say there's still some work to do. But what do you think, babe?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like what we've seen on Facebook groups and like Buy Nothing groups and stuff like that, I feel like there's like always responses and what I've seen on Nextdoor, people are helpful. But in terms like have I necessarily found my micro community within the larger community? Not yet.
As far as like finding that micro community and things like that, like what's been lacking for you?
Yeah, just like the feeling that there's no like real like central place in Fremont. So I think for me especially there's like a very like spatial, like actual like city vibe that is like a little bit missing in terms of like a central hub maybe.
Kind of like a downtown.
Yeah, like a downtown area where people can really just like go to connect like in person.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like Sarah said, I think there's a lot of kind of like online like presence for sure in like Fremont and like connecting that way versus like finding each other in like, you know, in common spaces. I do run a meetup group, and actually a surprising amount of people showed up, which was really nice to see. Yeah.
So even if the micro community isn't quite there, it shows that there is like there's a desire for it.
Exactly, like the people are here. It's just whether like we have like a space or like an actual like group or community to be part of.
A point to rally around.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then if you don't mind going into more like how you guys feel that the community in the city is connected, like specifically, we've kind of touched on it with like the online groups and things like that, but if there's anything else we can add to that.
I mean, I used going to a local gym, and I found there was a good sense of community from there. I got to know more neighbors in my actual local neighborhood just because it was a local gym. I was like, oh, you're down that street? I was like, oh, I've seen you with your dog. I was like, oh, and you're that person. So like there's been something about like small businesses too and local businesses that I think people are open to supporting, and there's when they host events too, or at the local farmers market, you get to know people and those people too. That I feel like that might be a sense of creating connection.
For sure.
Actually, that's a good point with dogs specifically. There are like, you know, really good dog parks around Fremont and the surrounding areas. So like definitely when like, you know, bring our dogs together, like talk to the people who are also at the dog parks and stuff. I feel like we can actually like get to know people that way too.
I guess in my mind, I think Fremont is such a family-friendly place. Like I've seen like all the like brochures of all like summer camps and like activities I can get involved in, but we don't have a family yet. We are a family, but we don't have kids necessarily. And I think because there's so many families here, families tend to have their own communities and kind of like are in their own flow and may not necessarily be branching out or adding people into that kind of like family group, so to say. And that might be kind of also a result from the pandemic still, where there's still a little bit of like connecting outside of the nuclear that needs to happen. I haven't necessarily seen a lot of opportunity to do so yet in Fremont.
Fremont definitely has a connective tissue. Seems to be the overwhelming opinion that there is definitely a sense of community here. But I think the last couple that I interviewed put it the best in saying that the overarching community is there, but there is I feel like a rather apparent lack of micro communities. There is a want for community, but there's really just a lack of places to meet and groups to organize under and things like that. So there needs to be an additional structure introduced to help people connect within those micro communities. The other thing is that Fremont is overwhelmingly like nuclear family focused. So there's a lot of interest in terms of things like summer camps and things to do with your kids and the school districts and everything else. But outside of that sort of family appeal is where things seem to get a little thin. So there's definitely improvements to be made in the city, but I think overall the feeling is that there is community here and there is a desire for community here. It's just that it's difficult to get these things organized to make them actually happen. Maybe it's because it's the Bay Area and everything is so fast-paced with people working in tech and so on and so forth. But regardless of the reasoning, the results, I think, are apparent.
Dale Hardware is now ready to open their own pet center. Now you can get all of your pet supplies. You can get everything you need for your furry friends right at Dale Hardware. On top of that, Dale Hardware is the only hardware store in the country that has a destination center for Milwaukee tools. There are more Milwaukee tools under that roof than any other retail establishment in the country. Even with these big changes, the heart of Dale Hardware has not changed. So come on down to Dale Hardware and let a specialist help you find exactly what you're looking for with the type of care and attention that hasn't changed for over 65 years. Buying a home is a big decision. When I'm trying to make a big decision in my life, I turn to family. Family generally has my well-being in mind. They want the best for me. Whenever I visit Jennifer at Petrocelli Homes in Niles, she treats me like family. If you're in the process of buying or selling a home, turn to family. Turn to Petrocelli Homes. And now, back to our conversation.
So I already talked about some of the things that I see when I come in here.
Mm-hmm.
You've got glass cases. Tell me, or a glass case here. Tell me what exactly, when I look at this, I see a bonnet, I see a purse, umbrellas. What kind of time periods and locations are represented here in this glass case?
Okay, that's a good question. This particular exhibit is called New Beginnings. And, it was just sort of tongue-in-cheek. We're having a new beginning, so we were going with that.
Sure.
And this exhibit is meant to be very fun and frolicky and, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we have 2 baby bonnets here, which are both tatted. And I would guess they're both from the early 1900s.
Wow.
I'm across the room, so I can't check out every detail.
Sure.
But by the particular stitches used, I can tell they were not from the 1800s.
Okay.
So then we have 2 parasols down at the bottom, and those would have come from the late 1800s, kind of a Victorian kind of thing. And the petty point purses that we have are also, and those are meant just as accents. They kind of go along with the lace. And then over here, we have a small fragment of Bedfordshire bobbin lace. And that
this one right here?
That is correct.
Yeah.
That was made several hundred years ago, although this piece would be quite modern. I would expect that to be maybe mid-20th century.
Wow. That's incredible. Now, you did refer to this. I can't remember if we were already recording. I think it was before we were recording. You were referring to this, and you would say this represents 100+ hours, or?
Yes, and it would depend on the lace maker.
Okay.
For one of us to do it, we're not earning a living, so we move incredibly slow.
Yeah.
People that were doing this in the industry, you're looking at least 100 hours of an industrial fast worker.
And where would this lace be used? Like, is this on a dress or on what kind of garment would it be on?
So I would describe that as a wide edging.
Okay.
It's got a flat sewing edge on one side, and the other side has a scalloped, undulating, that's the part that would hang down and look nice.
Yeah.
So you could put that really anywhere you saw fit.
Okay.
And people would often go to Europe, buy laces, and bring them back to their tailors or seamstresses.
Yeah.
And they would just put it as they wished. So you could see that on cuffs. You could see it on the bottom of a skirt or a dress. You could see it on a blouse.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because we're we're trying to squeeze down like hundreds of years of history and artifacts into like a quick conversation here, right? In the landscape, the arc of lace history, what are some of the notable points of those? Like I imagine there are times when it really accentuated. There was certain, I don't know, there were certain periods that were special when it came to lace making,
right?
And then there were other ones that maybe were not so special. What are some of those highlights that perhaps we could see and observe when we come here, or hear about when we talk to you?
Okay. So if I were to give you a timeline of highlights in my own mind, and this is biased from my own point of view, if you talk to a different lace maker, they would give you their own favorite points. But for me, I like studying the early laces the most. Those are my favorites.
Okay.
And I think it was a really interesting time when bobbin lace was emerging, kind of coming out of these workshops. So you're looking at guilds, and some of the artifacts that we have will have embroidery in the same thread, in the same piece, and then the lace that it's edged with also has the same thread. So it's really interesting to me to think about this object came out of a workplace where there were people doing multiple disciplines.
Yeah.
So I personally,
cool.
I find that interesting.
That's cool. Yeah.
Another stop on my tour would be probably in the early half of the 1800s, when you started seeing small kingdoms coming together into nations.
Yeah.
And you started seeing regional dress that would have lace on it.
Okay.
For example, in Germany, like every area had their own special dress. And they would use the metal lace and put it on the back of their caps. And like, it's a whole study all of its own. It's fascinating.
That is, yeah. I'm realizing there's a whole new world that just opened up to me when I came here today. So this is incredible. Yeah.
I think that's what's kept me interested as a hobby. I think that there's just so much to learn, and it's like an octopus. It's got tentacles everywhere, in history and money, in politics. Like it's just,
That's cool. So I don't want to be too nosy, but when I came in, you were on a Zoom call or on a phone call with someone from Ireland, and you were discussing something about lace. Do you mind me asking what was going on with that?
No, I'm sure. I feel pretty confident she wouldn't mind. So shout out to Myra Trenner over in Clones.
Okay, Clones, Ireland.
County, County Monaghan. She and some other gals in Ireland in the late 80s, or mid to late 80s, began trying to preserve Clones lace. So if we go back to the Great Hunger in the mid 1800s, there were a lot of starving people, and kids that couldn't even afford to go to school at the time. Many of them were taught to crochet by philanthropic women. Mostly they would come with their husbands who were pastors and things like that. Sometimes just very wealthy women, but although the two went hand in hand. So.
Sure.
And they taught how to crochet, and it has a really low startup cost. You're only looking at the thread and the hook versus, bobbin lace. You could have today hundreds or even thousands of dollars in bobbins and pillows and all kinds of things. So it had a low startup cost, and they were able to learn. And there are some theories about why the Irish were particularly good at crochet, but it's hearsay. You'll have to read the book to find out more about that. And Myra has done a really great job of going through and recording the oral history.
So just to be clear, when you say read the book and you talk about Myra, she is the author of a book that you're talking about.
That is correct.
And that's who you were talking to.
That's who I was talking to, and it's going to be going to print in about a week.
Okay.
And
she
we're
tells
really
the
excited.
History of lace in Ireland.
It's a 200-page book, and it's about half history and half pattern making.
Okay.
So you can read the history, or you can learn how to do it, or both. And she teaches for us through Zoom, which we have a dedicated group of gals that has been with us almost 3 years now, since the pandemic began. And this all started because Myra comes to Berkeley every year, and she teaches up at LaCisse, which is another a lace-affiliated place. And that year, I was supposed to go take her class. I'd always wanted to take it. And then the pandemic hit, and I had to cancel.
Wow.
And we tried our first virtual class, and I thought, well, that went really well. What should I do next? So, you look close to home first.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, heck, I missed that. Why not try there?
Exactly.
And sure enough, she's been with us ever since.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you said the book goes to print next week?
We're just on the final stages. So
okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
They're done when they're done. So it's just got a few days left in it.
So that's something I'm sure that will be able to be found online, but will you be selling copies of that here as well?
We will have copies here. It will be on Amazon, Etsy, and our web shop.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. We're talking about the fact that it was a way that people, as they went through the you called it the Great Hunger, the potato famine,
yes.
or whatever of Ireland, that kids could actually learn something that was easy, cheap startup or low startup,
right?
But then would also kind of had a good turnover for them to be able to make some money.
It really did, and it was something that families did together.
Okay.
So you might start your child on an easy part, and then as they get older, people are doing this in pieces. So a finished, say a collar, they were very common at that time. It would have the work of the whole family on it. And you put all these little motifs on it, and then someone has to do the filling. Sometimes that was done outside the family. But each family guarded their own patterns. So, and this was literally what was feeding their mouths. So they guarded those, and they didn't write them down ever. So for her to try to record this was really difficult. She had to talk to people and watch what they were doing.
That's pretty cool. Oh my goodness. It reminds me a little bit of, I went to Africa last year.
What country did you visit?
The Central African Republic.
Okay.
So it's been called, I think recently it's been the poorest country in the world. But it was interesting because we went to visit an orphanage there because the rebels and the rebellion that happens there so often, they go into villages and destroy them, and all these kids are left without parents and stuff. Right. But anyway, when we were traveling to this orphanage through these jungle roads, we'd stop in these small little villages, and these children would come out with hats, and they'd come out with mats and all types of stuff they had made with the grass that was there, and they were trying to sell them to us Americans, who they knew that we could be very generous with our purchasing, but here's all these kids
starving.
They're starving, and they're making these things just hoping that a truck of somebody who has more money than them or tourists would come through to be able to give them some money to be able to pay for something to keep them going. So what you were talking about, what happened in Ireland, reminded me of this. It's obviously a different art of basket weaving or using grass to make different things, but it sounds very similar to what was going on, but in a more intricate level, I think.
It was, and there was another layer to it. At least you're buying direct from the children when you're there. I've had that experience as well, and I understand what that's like. It's very hard to look in the eye of that child who's starving, and then when their friends find out that they got $10, you're mobbed, and it's rough going. But in Ireland, you actually had a middleman. You had women that would walk into the market on certain, usually one day a week, and they would sell it to a middleman. And that middleman would have it what they called done up, which would mean launder it, because the lace was often very dirty because of the conditions they were living in. And they would launder it, prep it, and then he would sell it for a much, much higher price.
Interesting.
A lot of it came to the U.S. A lot of it went to England. People there weren't having the money to buy it so much. It was most of it was going out.
Wow.
So one of the stories in the book is about one of the women that realized what was going on and took it upon herself to get rid of that step.
Wow.
And the women sort of took back their power.
Wow,
so
that's pretty cool.
Something I did not realize going into that book is how much women's history we were going to preserve, which just was really
that's cool.
Nice for me.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it a lot.
I love that. You mentioned something I want to ask you about. You mentioned washing or laundering the lace.
Yes.
I think I probably thought about that in regards to at maybe one or two moments in my life when I've seen a piece of lace. How hard is it to clean a piece of lace, or what is the process of like washing lace?
Right. There are some factors there. It depends on the type of lace. Some laces you just shouldn't wash.
Sure. Okay.
I mean, hands down. But crochet, for example, is made with a very sturdy thread.
Okay.
It was made in linen and then in cotton later, and it's very sturdy compared to other lace. So they would wash it. Myra always calls it suds.
Okay.
Here, when we wash things, we put them in pure soap. We usually use Orvis.
Okay.
And you're making sure that you're using water that doesn't have, it's not from a well. It doesn't have mineral deposits, that kind of thing. But the thing that really takes the longest is the pinning it out, because when you wash the lace, all those holes disappear. So you're wanting to lay it out in such a way that you're, making sure that it comes out nice.
Yeah.
So it's one of the main reasons that people stopped wearing lace. And I'm talking about expensive handmade lace.
Sure.
If you did not have a person in your household to do that for you, you probably were not going to keep wearing that lace. I mean, life really changed. But now, of course, we have cheap machine-made lace that we can go buy, and you just toss it in the washing machine.
Yeah, I understand. That's interesting. I want to talk a little bit about that as well. So, you talk about this piece of lace that took potentially 100 hours or more than that to make by human crafting, but then you did reference also the fact that you could go down to local Joanne Fabrics and you could potentially get a piece of lace that costs $2. Talk to me a little bit about the difference between what might be made handmade. What is special about something handmade besides the fact that it takes the precious time of a human being,
right?
And something that's maybe machine made that can be sold for $2.
Yeah. So there are a few ways to make lace by machine. Some of the first computers were actually they were programming to make lace. We had an exhibit on that once.
Really? One of the first computers.
It was binary, so it was kind of an on or off type of situation. And, there is a thread or there's not a thread. And it would run these giant machines that were bigger than the room that we're in.
Huh.
And we don't have many left in this country.
Sure.
But the big place where that was made was East Germany, and it's still made there. There's actually a lace museum there on just machined lace. I went there a few years ago. It's fantastic.
Wow.
They're having a hard time right now, though, with a lot of knockoffs coming from other countries further east that are copying the lace and then making it differently. But I would say that you can get machines that will actually weave it the way a hand would, and those are very similar. Those were more common in the mid-1800s and the early Industrial Revolution. Nowadays, most of the lace I see is what we call chemical lace. I don't know if you know anyone that embroiders at all, but an embroidery machine is very similar to how chemical lace is made.
Okay.
So you're making it on some kind of substrate. The machine is embroidering on that, and then you put it into, with machines here, it's usually water, but you can put it in other solvent, and then that substrate washes away, and you're just left with the embroidery.
Wow.
So that process is very similar, and some people even make lace on their home embroidery machines.
Wow.
That way.
Wow. You make lace though too, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you enjoy the most about making lace yourself?
I think what I enjoy is that it never gets boring. I mean, you could just stick with one thing and make the same pattern your whole life, and that would be fine. And there are people that do that.
That would be known as the Kim Davis pattern.
There are people that do that, but there is just an infinite amount of things to study. I mean, one thing that we often say to each other is, I need 5 lifetimes. I mean, there's just so much to learn about and so much to study. So everyone kind of picks their own favorite thing.
What's the piece that you've made in your life that you love, or that you would just say, or is there a certain maybe a series of pieces that you've made that you just love and it's you kind of like your pride and joy, or maybe you're working on that, or maybe you have a vision of one like that down the road?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I have ones that I like, but I think your current project is probably always your favorite.
Always your favorite,
it's happening. Right now, I actually have branched out a little. I usually make my lace in wire. I'm a little non-traditional.
Yeah.
I teach traditionally, but I branch out a little bit. And I have branched out into EL wire. Have you ever heard of that before? It's electroluminescent wire.
Okay.
So in the end, it winds up looking a lot like neon.
Okay.
But think of the size of spaghetti or smaller. And so I have a harness that was built, and I've made a piece, and then I've sculpted a snail, and it's going to go in the garden so that I have a lit up snail trail at night.
Oh my goodness, that is awesome. Wow.
So we we advocate for where lace came from, but there's also a large proponent of where is lace going.
Yeah.
And
that's cool. So let me ask you this. So if you're making this, and this is truly an art. This is not just, I mean, at one point in time, I mean, it was part of the fashion industry for the world, at particularly Europe, for so many centuries. If you were to make that, obviously, I believe you're making that for yourself.
Yes, I am.
If you were to sell that, though,
oh my,
how would you value that?
If I charged myself a fair wage,
yes,
and the materials that went into it, probably about $8,000 or more.
Wow, that's incredible.
It's a little crazy.
Yeah.
But a lot of people do separate craft laces from art laces.
Okay.
So often if you I've actually had European people walk into the museum and gasp when they see our craft laces. Like it's a horrible thing. It's just a horrible
when you're
thing.
saying gasp, I was thinking a good thing, but it's a horrible thing.
We've had lots of good gasps
Yeah.
too, but there have been just a couple of people that have been so shocked that we dare have craft laces. So craft laces are things that are coming on heavier thread and common for people to do and then use themselves, as opposed to an industry. In this country, women tatted, knitted, crocheted. And starting, by the 1920s, you started seeing women's magazines with, I would bet money if you looked in your closet, you might be able to find a crocheted pillowcase somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe. Yeah. You mentioned wire lace and this luminescent
electroluminescent wire. Yes.
What are the primary materials that are used in lace? Like because there are different types, I would imagine.
Yes. Most people use linen or cotton.
Okay.
I mean, if you said what is traditional to make lace out of, hands down linen or cotton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No contest.
And then there's the whole process. Then there's the whole process of I'm sure making those threads or those fabrics as well. I mean, when I mentioned that I told you I was in Ireland last year, visited my sister who was living there, and obviously Ireland's known for its sheep and its wool.
And it's linen as well.
It's linen as well. So I imagine that was a more common fabric for a lot of those countries to be able to have on hand to be able to make the lace.
Absolutely.
Wire seems to be a little bit probably now it might be something more accessible, but was wire harder to get back then?
I think it was more expensive. I don't know that scarcity was the problem so much as it was the monetary consideration.
Okay.
But definitely in the beginning, in the very, very beginning, you saw military uniforms and you saw people in the churches and you saw royalty all wearing metal lace. And at first it wasn't necessarily lace. It could have been a galloon, or I'm sure you've seen military outfits with, and it really was born out of that industry, which was applique onto something as opposed to the way we probably think of lace as an edging. It's on the edge of something. This lace was appliqued onto things. And things like that go back to the Vikings.
Wow.
We call them passaments. And so I really enjoy studying the history that goes around the metal stuff.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So when I think of, you just said something that kind of blew my mind, because I would joke about it a little bit. But I do have Irish blood in me, very little, but I have Viking blood in me as well.
Yes.
And when I think of Vikings, I don't think of like delicate, like artistic, like hoity-toity people. The Vikings had lace? Maybe?
I think a person would argue, there are some people that would argue yes and some that would argue no. I would call it lace. They did a lot of tablet weaving, which was very intricate.
Okay.
And you're seeing it sometimes in things they put on their hair or the ties to close things. And you saw a lot of the jewelry. There's just a lot of... There's a lot going on
some
there.
Of the same practices or some of the same like sort of design elements that were found in Viking history, as you might get into some of the the grander countries of Europe, I guess.
Yeah, my favorite researcher I found, there's this website that has all these researchers that post pages, and her name is Beatrix Nuts. I've never met her.
Okay.
But she writes the best articles about digs that are happening in Europe. And, they're down in a bog somewhere and they're studying these things. And it's fantastic.
That's awesome.
So.
Wow. A lot to discover. This, I think, a great place for people to discover more about lace is here at the Lace Museum. So you guys are opening your grand opening weekend is Mother's Day weekend.
Correct.
If you're listening in years to come, this is 2023. Ongoing, what are the hours or what are the expectations for people to be able to come and take advantage of the museum here?
Sure. So we're going to be open the second and fourth Saturday of every month.
Okay.
From 12:30 noon to 4:30 p.m.
Okay.
And that's where we're going to start. And if there is more community demand, we'll probably open up a weekday on the first and third week.
Okay.
The rest of the time we spend conserving our lace, teaching our online classes, doing all of our research. We're definitely open by appointment. So we have volunteers and students in and out every day.
Okay.
So if you want to come, just email in. It's lacemuseum@gmail.com.
Okay.
Know the.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well. Know the. Yeah.
And we're happy. You know, sometimes we receive donations of lace, or sometimes we have people wanting to learn about it, getting it repaired. I mean, all sorts of business happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, you already told me that you had this room completely filled with people recently. Is that right?
Oh, yes. Just yesterday, it was wall to wall. The Golden Gate Lacers were here.
Wow.
You can find them online as well.
Yeah.
And that is a lace making guild of just people that like to make lace.
What
and
were
they come
doing?
together.
They were making lace here?
They were making lace. They were having some snacks. They were talking about things they've done in the past. There was some show and tell. They were talking about our national convention that's coming up. And there were 2 people that came in that wanted to learn.
Wow, that's cool. So just curious, I know that part of museums' efforts are to preserve the past.
Correct.
And part of what you're doing by teaching is to help people to continue to learn about how to do that themselves.
Correct.
Do you would you say that it makes sense to bring children in here, or do you have an offering for children to come and learn about this?
We do sometimes go out to schools. They'll have us come out, and 5 or 6 of us will come into a classroom, and we can take about 5 or 6 kids at a time.
Okay.
So we do that, and that's something we can do. Generally speaking, age 7 and up is the best.
Okay.
We don't have an issue with children coming in.
Sure.
I mean, certainly it's not the kind of place you want to
Right.
let
Yeah.
a
Climb on
2-year-old
that
with
mannequin
jam.
and slide down that. Yeah.
That's not a good idea. But we're happy to have children in to look around.
Cool.
And once they're about 7, they're usually ready.
Yeah.
It's the math skills, believe it or not,
Yeah.
that you need. The developmental math skills. Yeah.
So before I go, I want to just ask, and hopefully this will help people as well. The opening weekend is Mother's Day weekend, May 13th, 14th. But there's going to be ongoing exhibits that are going to be you're going to continue to be making or displaying exhibits.
Correct.
Ongoing. You said up to 10,000. You have.
We have
potentially 10,000 things that you could display.
We have, yes, that many. We do have that many things.
Wow.
We don't put them all out at once.
Sure.
But we change the exhibit at least twice a year, but we also have a permanent exhibit that we'll be building in months to come.
Okay. And if somebody does want to come and make the most of their time here, how much time should they plan to spend here at the museum?
Ooh, it really depends on their interest level.
Okay.
I will say there are usually 2 types of people that visit. There are those that just want to become aware of lace, and about 30 minutes is plenty for that person.
Okay.
Now, if you think you might want to start making lace, or you really want to get into it and really talk, sometimes people come in and want to look in our library. That could take a couple of hours.
Okay.
But if you're just looking to just find out what it's about a half hour is plenty.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, I'm going to bring my family in here at some point in time,
That'd
and
be
I know
great.
that they would love this. Thank you for your time, Kim. I really
You as well.
appreciate it, and I hope that your new location proves to be a great spot for you. And if you do have a little hard time finding it, don't give up. It's worth coming out here. We'll put the address on on our show notes as well, and you can find it. And it might take a few twists and turns, but you'll get here, and it's worth your time and effort. So, thanks again, Kim.
Thank you.
This episode was hosted and produced by Ricky B. I'm Gary Williams. Andrew Cavett is the editor. Music is provided through soundstripe.com. You can find links to our social media and other content at thefremontpodcast.com. Be sure to subscribe wherever it is that you listen so you don't miss an episode. And if you're so inclined, leave a kind review so that others can find the podcast. Join us next week on the Fremont Podcast.
This is a Muggins Media podcast.